March 13th, 2019, a quiet and peaceful street, the kind where nothing bad is ever expected to happen. The call came in just after midnight, a frantic voice on the other end, gasping for breath, barely able to speak. When the police arrived at the house on Maple Street, they were met with an eerie silence. No shouting, no sounds of struggle. But inside, there was a scene no one could have prepared for. Olivia Hart, only 17, was found dead in her own home. Her lifeless body was discovered in the basement, her room untouched, no sign of forced entry, no robbery. It didn't make sense. The community, shocked beyond belief, couldn't wrap their heads around it. She was just a teenager. So why was she gone? And then the questions started. The questions no one wanted to ask. What was the real story? What had happened in that house? Who could do something like this? A year earlier, everything had seemed perfect for Olivia's family. Her mother, Maria, had just remarried. She thought she'd found love again. Olivia, despite her initial doubts, had started to accept her new stepfather, Robert. Everything seemed like a fresh start. Until it wasn't. Because the truth was darker than anyone could ever have imagined. Beneath the surface of a picture-perfect family, there was a deadly secret. An affair that no one knew about. A betrayal so devastating, it would tear everything apart. What happened in that house wasn't just a tragedy, it was the unraveling of a family, a betrayal so deep that it left behind nothing but horror. And the most chilling part of all, the person responsible never expected his darkest secret to be exposed. This is a story about trust, a story about obsession, and a story about how love can turn into something monstrous when it's twisted beyond recognition. But the real question is, how did it come to this? How did Maria's new marriage become the very thing that would destroy her daughter's life? And what happened to Olivia when the man who was supposed to protect her betrayed her in the worst possible way? Stay with me as we dive deep into this disturbing case, but be warned, the truth is far more terrifying than you could ever imagine. Maria had always been the picture of strength. She had to be. Her life hadn't been easy. After losing her first husband, James, in a car accident that left her alone to raise a child, Maria was left to pick up the pieces. James had been the love of her life. He was the kind of man who made you believe in true love, and when he was gone, it felt like part of her had been ripped away. Olivia, their daughter, was just a little girl of 7 when her father died. She grew up with memories of a man she barely had time to know, and with the absence of a father figure that Maria could never replace. It was a hole neither of them could fill. Maria worked hard, juggling 2 jobs just to keep things afloat. She never let Olivia see her struggle, always putting on a brave face, telling her daughter that everything would be okay, but inside, Maria was lost. She wasn't just grieving the death of James, she was grieving the loss of herself. Then, years later, something changed. Maria met Robert. Robert was everything Maria had dreamed of, a man who promised to fill the empty space in her life. He was handsome, charming, successful. He had a way of making you believe in him, making you think that maybe, just maybe, happiness was still within reach. He seemed perfect, and for Maria, who had spent years picking up the shattered pieces of her past, Robert was the future she had been waiting for. But Robert didn't just come into Maria's life, he came into Olivia's life too. He was a man of wealth, charisma, and the kind of charm that made people trust him instantly. He won over the entire neighborhood, and soon Maria felt like she had found a new partner to help raise Olivia. He took her out to dinner, showed her the kind of attention that made her feel special again. For the first time in years, Maria could breathe. She thought maybe she could finally have a normal family again. But what Maria didn't know was that Robert had a past, a dark one, hidden under a polished exterior. He was a businessman, yes, successful and well-respected, but there was something in his eyes that always seemed to be searching for something more than just love. Robert had a history of using women for their money, for their status. He didn't care about Maria's heart. He cared about what she could provide. She was a means to an end, and her wealth was the prize he was after. But Robert was a master of deception. He knew how to hide his true intentions. He wasn't some obvious predator. No, he played the part of the perfect man, the perfect stepfather. He made sure Maria saw what she wanted to see, the family dinners, the long walks, the thoughtful gestures. He made Olivia feel special too, as if he was the father figure she'd never had. Slowly, he started to infiltrate their lives in ways no one could see coming. Maria, blinded by her own loneliness, couldn't see the cracks starting to form in the foundation of their family. She couldn't see that Robert was slowly isolating her from her daughter. He became her rock, her protector, and Maria let herself believe that everything would be fine. But Olivia saw something different. She noticed how Robert's gaze lingered a little too long, how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. She felt uncomfortable, but she didn't know how to explain it. She didn't want to be the one to ruin her mother's happiness, so she kept her feelings to herself. But inside, Olivia was already starting to fear the man who had come into their lives with the promise of making everything better. Olivia, a teenager on the brink of discovering her own identity, knew something wasn't right. But she had no voice. She didn't want to cause trouble. She wanted to protect her mother's fragile happiness, so she remained quiet, trapped in her own unease. But what Olivia didn't know, what no one knew, was that Robert had been planning something far darker than anyone could have ever imagined. His intentions for Maria were just the beginning. It wasn't just her life that he had set his sights on. No, his real target was Olivia, his own stepdaughter. And in the end, it would be Olivia who would pay the price for the betrayal that was quietly unfolding behind closed doors. At first, it seemed harmless. Robert's gestures, his compliments, they were easy to dismiss. He called Olivia his little princess, a nickname that was meant to be affectionate, innocent even. But something in the way he said it began to feel wrong. It wasn't the words, it was the look in his eyes. He had always looked at her like a daughter, a girl he wanted to protect. Now, his gaze lingered too long. His smiles, once warm and fatherly, began to hold something darker, something unsettling. Robert would often take Olivia out on weekends, without her mother. "Just you and me, princess," he'd say. Maria, so wrapped up in her new life and her work, never questioned it. She thought it was normal. She thought Robert was just trying to bond with Olivia, to be the father she never had. But what was really happening was something far more dangerous, something no one could have anticipated. It started with small comments. Robert would tell Olivia how beautiful she had become, how grown up she was. At first, Olivia didn't think much of it. After all, she was a teenager, navigating the complicated world of growing up. But the more Robert spoke to her this way, the more her stomach twisted. She didn't want to believe it, but the words began to feel heavy, like a weight pressing down on her chest. She began to feel trapped, suffocated by his attention. She felt like she couldn't escape the suffocating grip of his praise. And yet she said nothing. She kept quiet, afraid to disrupt the delicate balance of her family. But deep down she knew something wasn't right. Robert's attention, it wasn't normal. It wasn't love. It was something far more dangerous, something she couldn't yet name. Maria, too busy with the excitement of her new life, her new marriage, never saw it. She was caught up in the whirlwind of success, the rush of feeling loved again after so many years of solitude. But in her pursuit of happiness, she missed the warning signs, missed the way Robert was slowly pulling her daughter further and further into his orbit. He was isolating her, manipulating her, and Maria didn't see it until it was far too late. Robert's behavior grew more calculated with each passing day. He began to isolate Olivia more and more, subtly pushing her away from her friends, from the people who could see through the illusion. He would convince her that no one understood her like he did, that no one cared for her the way he did. At first, Olivia tried to fight it, tried to spend time with her friends, with her own mother, but Robert would always find a way to keep her close. He would pull her aside, remind her how special their bond was. Slowly, over time, he wore her down. He made her feel like she had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. She was alone. He had made her believe it. Olivia started to feel as though her mother didn't really care about her anymore. Maria was too busy with Robert, too busy with her work. Olivia's isolation grew, and the walls that Robert had built around her started to feel like her only shelter. And that's when Robert struck. In a moment of vulnerability, when Olivia was at her weakest, when she felt abandoned and unloved by everyone else in her life, Robert took what he wanted. And she, feeling more lost than ever, gave in. It wasn't something she had planned, it wasn't something she had wanted, but in that moment Olivia felt a desperate need for connection, for someone to make her feel seen, to make her feel wanted. And Robert, he was there, right where he had always been, ready to exploit her weakness. But it didn't end there. As the affair continued in secret, Olivia's body began to betray her. She felt tired all the time, nauseous, dizzy. At first she thought it was just stress, maybe the result of everything she had been going through. But the symptoms didn't go away, they only worsened. Something was terribly wrong. And then, one day, she did what she never thought she'd have to do. She took the test. The truth hit her like a punch to the stomach. Olivia was pregnant. And not only that, she was also HIV positive. The virus that Robert had secretly carried, the virus he had never told her about, had been passed on to her. It wasn't just her life that was ruined, it was her future. And the worst part? Robert didn't care. When Olivia confronted him, when she demanded answers, he didn't apologize. He didn't show remorse. Instead, he panicked. He tried to convince her they could fix this, that everything could be kept a secret. But the truth was, Robert wasn't worried about Olivia, he was worried about himself. And in his mind, covering it all up was the only option. He had already lost control of the situation. Now he needed to make sure no one else found out. Olivia had no idea what she was about to face. No idea that this horrifying discovery would set off a chain of events so devastating, so destructive, that it would destroy everything she thought she knew about her family, about love, and about trust. And in the end, it would be the secret that would tear them all apart. Days passed, but Olivia's world was falling apart. The weight of her secret crushed her. She had no idea how to navigate it, no idea how to escape from the suffocating grip of Robert's lies. She needed someone to hear her, to believe her. She needed her mother, the one person she thought would always protect her. The thought of telling Maria everything, the pregnancy, the HIV, the affair, it terrified her. What if her mother didn't believe her? What if she thought Olivia was lying? And what about Robert? What if he found out? But no matter how terrified she was, Olivia knew she had to try. She decided to meet Maria the next day, to tell her the truth, to finally be free of the chains Robert had wrapped around her. She just needed to get out, to speak to someone who loved her, and maybe, just maybe, her mother would be the one to save her from this nightmare. She clung to that hope, even as her stomach churned with fear. But Robert wasn't blind. He saw what Olivia was planning. He saw the look in her eyes, the way she was starting to slip away from his control. And for Robert, there was nothing worse than losing control. Olivia wasn't his anymore, not the way he needed her to be. And he couldn't let her destroy everything he had worked so hard to build. The life he had created with Maria, the wealth, the security, it was all at risk. Robert would go to any lengths to protect that, even if it meant destroying the one person he had once promised to care for. That night, as Olivia tried to gather the strength to confront her mother, Robert made sure she never would. He locked her in the basement, his grip tightening around her throat in a way that she never could have imagined. The man who had once been her stepfather, the man who had shown her affection, had turned into a monster, willing to do anything to keep his secrets safe. He threatened her life, told her that if she even thought about telling Maria, it would be the last thing she ever did. Olivia was powerless, trapped, alone, and frightened beyond belief. The choice to speak out had already been taken from her. The next morning, Olivia had planned to speak to Maria, to find a way out of the hell she had been living. But Robert's hold on her was now ironclad. He had broken her spirit, and he had already decided that her life was a threat he could not afford. He watched her, pacing in that cold, dark basement, terrified of what would happen next. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his control over Olivia and his belief that he could get away with anything would lead to his own downfall. In the dead of night, as the house fell silent, Robert made the decision to act. Olivia, still locked in the basement, had become a liability he couldn't risk. His mind, twisted and frantic, reasoned that the only way to protect himself was to remove the threat. He crept down the stairs, his footsteps soft but deliberate. In that moment, he was no longer a husband or a father figure. He was a man consumed by his need for control, willing to kill to protect his secrets. He found Olivia, trembling with fear, and without hesitation, he suffocated her. The life left her eyes in an instant. No screams, no struggle, just the cold finality of a man who had gotten away with so much he thought he could get away with anything. Robert, now drenched in sweat and panic, took a step back. He had done it. He had taken her life just as easily as he had stolen her innocence. But even as he looked at Olivia's lifeless body, he was already thinking about how to cover his tracks. He staged the scene, made it look like a tragic accident, a suicide perhaps, or maybe a runaway situation, anything to explain away the sudden disappearance of his stepdaughter, the girl who had been his biggest threat. Days turned into weeks, and still no sign of Olivia. The community was in mourning, but the police had no answers. They combed through every lead, turned over every stone, and yet there were no clues, no suspects. Olivia had vanished without a trace. Maria's heart shattered each time she heard a siren or a knock at the door, hoping it was her daughter coming back. But with each passing day, the hope dwindled. The police, too, they were losing hope. How could a young girl simply disappear? Where was she? Maria couldn't accept that her daughter was gone. She felt it in her gut. Something wasn't right. She needed to know the truth. So, in the quiet desperation that gripped her heart, Maria turned to the hidden cameras she had installed in the house months earlier, during the moments when she had first begun to feel uneasy about Robert. She had told herself that it was just her being paranoid, but now those cameras seemed like her last chance to uncover what had really happened in her home. Maria sat alone in the dark, staring at the monitor. Her hands shook as she clicked through the footage. Each second that passed seemed to stretch into eternity. And then, there it was. The footage she never expected to see. The man she loved, the man she trusted, was revealed as the monster who had torn their lives apart. She watched, unable to look away, as Robert's cold, calculated face appeared on the screen. He moved silently, methodically, as he closed in on Olivia. She could hear him speaking to her, his voice low and soothing, but his words laced with a darkness she hadn't known existed. And then, the unthinkable happened. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she saw the moment when Robert silenced her daughter's cries, when he took her life. The footage didn't lie. It was all there, Robert's hands around Olivia's throat, his face twisted with anger and control. The horror was overwhelming, the pain too much to bear. He had done it. He had killed Olivia, and in the seconds after he wiped his hands clean, as though he had just finished some trivial task, his face cold and emotionless. No regret, no sorrow, just the satisfaction of a man who thought he had gotten away with it. Maria's mind reeled as she tried to process what she had just witnessed. She couldn't breathe, her body went numb. The man she had married, the man she had trusted with everything, her love, her life, her daughter, was capable of such unspeakable horrors. She watched the footage over and over, hoping that somehow it wasn't true, that it was all a terrible mistake, but it wasn't a mistake. Robert had done this. He had murdered their daughter. And as the reality set in, something even darker began to unfold before Maria's eyes. The footage didn't just show Olivia's death. It showed Robert's coldness, his lack of remorse, his complete and utter indifference to the life he had taken. But just when Maria thought the worst was over, the final chilling twist was about to reveal itself. What she saw next would shatter her heart in a way she never thought possible. Preposterous. The next few seconds on the screen were like the unraveling of a dark, twisted nightmare. As Maria watched, the footage revealed something far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. The camera feed showed Robert in moments before and after Olivia's death, but this time the footage wasn't just about the murder. It was about Robert's history, his dark past. A past he had buried deep, too deep for anyone to see. As Maria watched, she saw flashes of other women, other lives, that Robert had used, manipulated and discarded, just like he had done with her daughter. These were faces Maria had never seen before, women who had been just like her, trusting, vulnerable, and just like Olivia, they were victims of Robert's dark, insatiable needs. The man Maria thought she knew, her charming, wealthy, handsome husband, was not the man he had pretended to be. He was a predator, a man whose obsession with control and manipulation had no limits. Olivia wasn't the first, and she wouldn't have been the last. Maria felt the weight of it all crush her chest. The truth was far darker than she could have ever fathomed. It wasn't just Robert's betrayal that destroyed their lives. It was his history, his repeated abuse of women that had led them here. And now Maria was left to grapple with the unbearable truth that she had been complicit in the destruction of her daughter's life, in the destruction of everything she had once believed in. The police, armed with the footage Maria had uncovered, moved quickly to arrest Robert. The arrest was swift, but the shockwaves rippled through the entire community. The charming businessman, the man everyone thought they knew, was revealed as a monster, a serial abuser who had preyed on vulnerable women for years. The community, stunned by the horrific truth, he struggled to comprehend the depth of his deception. The man who had been so warmly welcomed into their lives was a cold-blooded killer, and now he would pay for his crimes. But for Maria, the pain was just beginning. As Robert was led away in handcuffs, his expression empty and cold, Maria collapsed. Her heart had already been broken, but the weight of her guilt, of her role in Olivia's death, was too much for her to bear. The grief, the shame, the regret, they consumed her. She had loved him, she had believed in him, and now she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her life, the ruins of her family. In the days that followed, the truth about Maria came to light. The police revealed that Maria had suspected Robert's dark past all along. She had seen the signs, felt the unease, but her desperate need for love and companionship had blinded her to the truth. She had ignored the warning signs, hoping, praying that the man she had fallen in love with was not the man he had truly been. But the lies they both had lived with, the lies that had kept them together, had destroyed everything. In the end, it wasn't just Robert's crimes that led to the tragedy. It was the lies they both told themselves, the lies they couldn't escape. Maria's grief reached its final, devastating point. She couldn't live with the pain, with the weight of her guilt. She ended her life in an act of despair and sorrow. The woman who had once been the picture of strength, the mother who had fought to protect her daughter, had now become a casualty of the lies and betrayal that had consumed them both. And in the end, no one was left to bear witness to the truth. This is a story of betrayal at the highest level, a tale of love turned into obsession and the unthinkable consequences that follow. What do you think? Could this have been prevented? Could Maria have saved her daughter? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Maria's shoes? And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more heart-stopping, true crime stories. The truth is often darker than we imagine.